Welcome back to our channel. Hold on, that Washington quarter from 1965, 1978, 1983, or 1997 might be hiding serious value. A 1965 silver planchet error sold for over $17,000. An MS67 1978 no-mint mark fetched $12,233. High-grade MS66 1983 quarters go for up to $11,504. And pristine MS68 1997 specimens reached $13,525. Think your change is worthless? Like and subscribe to uncover hidden quarter fortunes. The year was 1965, and the U.S. Mint was under immense pressure. The nation was in the midst of a severe coin shortage. Silver prices had risen sharply, pushing people to hoard coins made from the precious metal. Dimes, quarters, and half dollars, all containing 90% silver, were vanishing from circulation faster than the mint could produce replacements. In response, Congress authorized a dramatic change. A new clad composition for the dime and quarter, abandoning silver in favor of a copper core sandwiched between layers of copper-nickel. The Philadelphia Mint. The presses were adjusted, new blanks arrived by the truckload, and the familiar roar of production grew louder than ever. Workers scrambled to churn out millions of the newly designed clad quarters to meet demand. Yet, amid the rush and confusion of the transition, a quiet mistake slipped through, unnoticed by the human eye or machine. Boxes of silver planchets, destined for earlier issues, still lingered in storage. In the chaos, a handful of these old silver blanks found their way onto the presses intended for clad quarters. The dies struck them as if nothing were wrong, imprinting the same 1965 date, the same Washington bust, the same heraldic eagle on the reverse. When they dropped from the presses, they glinted just a little brighter, their edges missing the telltale copper stripe of the new composition. No one paused to notice. No one stopped the line. They were packed, bagged, and shipped out into the stream of commerce alongside their clad siblings, indistinguishable to most. For years, they passed unnoticed, handed over counters, slotted into jukeboxes, rattling in cash registers. Then, slowly, sharp-eyed collectors began to spot them. A certain brilliance in the luster, a different tone to the ring when dropped, a faint difference in weight. At first, many dismissed the idea. After all, wasn't 1965 the year silver was abandoned? Surely no quarter dated that year could contain the precious metal. One such collector, a man named Joseph Landry, was one of the first to pay close attention. He'd been a student of coins since childhood, drawn to their history and artistry, fascinated by the stories they carried. At his kitchen table one quiet evening, he poured out a bag of quarters from the bank, idly sorting through them. He wasn't expecting much, just another routine hunt for double dies or off-center strikes. But when he picked up a 1965 quarter, something about it caught his eye. It was the color, first of all. The soft, unmistakable sheen of silver, rather than the duller gray of clad. He flipped it between his fingers, then peered at its edge. There was no copper streak, just a uniform, silver-colored band. His heart began to pound. Could it be? He weighed it against another quarter from the same bag, slightly heavier. The sound when dropped was sharper, purer somehow. That night he barely slept, rising before dawn to compare his find against his reference books. Every source confirmed what he already knew. No silver quarters were supposed to have been struck in 1965. And yet here it was, sitting in his palm, daring him to believe. Over the weeks that followed, Joseph took his find to a professional grader. The verdict was definitive. 1965 Washington quarter, struck on a 90% silver planchet intended for earlier production. Mint error. The encapsulated label only added to the mystique. Joseph's hands trembled as he held it, marveling at the notion that a little accident at the mint had created something so rare, so extraordinary that he began to follow auctions closely after that, tracking the few other known examples as they surfaced. At first, the market didn't seem to know what to make of them. One sold for a modest sum, another for slightly more. Collectors whispered about the oddity, but prices moved slowly, hesitantly, as the hobby came to grips with the rarity of what had happened. But as more details of the 1965 transition became widely understood, how silver was abruptly discontinued, how a few planchets might have remained behind in the rush, the value of these errors began to climb. One sold at auction for several $1,000s, then another for nearly double. Interest intensified as articles and stories circulated in collector magazines, recounting how these few silver quarters bore silent witness to one of the most dramatic shifts in U.S. coinage history. For Joseph, watching the market felt like watching a living story unfold. Prices would surge, then settle, then surge again. But each sale seemed to confirm that the coins were growing in esteem, moving from curiosity to coveted rarity. Even skeptical dealers, who once dismissed the idea of a 1965 silver quarter, now clamored to acquire one when the chance arose. The physical error itself was subtle but striking. To the untrained eye, the coin looked ordinary, its obverse and reverse designs identical to every other quarter of the era. Only the composition gave it away: the heavier weight, the bright white luster, the absence of the copper edge. It was easy to imagine how it could have happened. An old silver blank mixed into a bin of clad planchets, overlooked amid the frenzy of meeting production quotas. And yet, that small oversight transformed a handful of coins into something unforgettable. Years later, Joseph received a call from a fellow collector who claimed to have found another example, this one with an unexpected twist. It was a 1965 silver quarter with a dramatic die crack splitting across the eagle's wing on the reverse. An error on top of an error, a unique specimen. The photographs he shared sent shockwaves through the collecting world. Articles described it as a once-in-a-lifetime find, and speculation about its value ran wild. That revelation reignited interest in all 1965 silver quarters, sending their prices higher than ever. Collectors and dealers scoured rolls, jars, and old bank bags, hoping to discover another. Stories of these finds appeared in newspapers and blogs, each adding another layer to the coin's legend. And through it all, the value continued its steady ascent. What had once been spent carelessly on gumballs and bus rides was now fetching figures that would have seemed impossible decades earlier. The last major auction result set jaws dropping yet again. The bidding was tense, electric, each increment pushing higher until the hammer finally fell. The final price, between $52,000 and $126,000, depending on condition and provenance. For Joseph, for collectors everywhere, that number wasn't just about the money. It was proof of what they'd always believed, that sometimes the smallest mistakes can leave the most enduring marks. And so they keep searching, fingers brushing through piles of change, hearts quickening each time they turn over a 1965 quarter, daring to dream it might shine just a little brighter. In the quiet of a late autumn morning in 1983, the U.S. Mint was humming as it always did, pressing quarter after quarter into existence, each one destined to jingle in pockets, pass through countless hands, and vanish into the everyday rhythm of commerce. That year, production at the Philadelphia Mint was particularly busy. Economic recovery was underway after a deep recession, and demand for coins had surged. Steel-gray planchets rolled through machines at dizzying speed, copper-nickel layers fused under immense pressure, the familiar image of George Washington stamped with cold precision. Few stopped to think about the millions of quarters being minted that year, let alone the possibility that some of them were already fated to become more than just currency. There was a certain irony in how something so rare could emerge from the very heart of a process designed to eliminate flaws. The press operators, the inspectors, the supervisors all trusted their mechanical guardians to catch mistakes. Quality control was the backbone of the mint, and yet, here and there, something strange slipped through the cracks. Among the millions minted, one particular quarter bore a flaw that no one noticed. Not then. Not for some time. It would take years before anyone truly understood the significance of what had happened. A collector by the name of Thomas Dillard was not the type to overlook details. He had been combing through coins for over 2 decades by the time he stumbled across the 1983 quarter that would change everything. His hands bore the fine polish of experience. His eyes had been trained by countless hours spent beneath the glow of magnifiers, scrutinizing minute ridges, lettering, and dates. At first, it was just another night at his desk, another stack of coins to examine. He had acquired a small roll of 1983 quarters from a flea market dealer, a man who didn't much care for numismatics but knew Thomas paid cash. As Thomas worked through the roll, he almost missed it. The quarter didn't immediately scream its difference. The weight felt correct. The diameter was unchanged. But the surface had a strange, muted quality, a softness to the design that felt off. He set it aside and kept going through the rest of the roll before circling back. That was when he noticed it. The coin's reverse, the side bearing the proud eagle, looked incomplete. The details were thinner, flatter somehow, as though they hadn't struck properly. The feathers were vague, the lettering slightly blurry. It was subtle, easily dismissed as simple wear, but something about it nagged at him, his pulse quickened. He fetched his loupe and examined it under higher magnification. The truth became clearer. The quarter had been struck on a planchet that was never meant for a quarter at all. Through a faint shimmer in the coin's luster, he could see evidence of a copper core exposed in tiny scratches. This was no ordinary clad quarter. Thomas began to suspect it was struck on a copper planchet, left over from pennies that had ceased to be pure copper after 1982. His mind whirred through the possibilities. Could it really be? That night stretched on into dawn. He weighed the coin, slightly lighter than standard. He compared the sound when dropped against another quarter, a duller ring. He checked and rechecked reference books, searching for mentions of errors from 1983. There were notes on weak strikes, yes, and double dies, but this was different. The more he read, the more his hands began to tremble with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Over the weeks that followed, Thomas sent the coin to a professional grading service. The wait was agonizing, each day longer than the last. When the coin finally came back, encapsulated in its protective case, the label confirmed his suspicion. 1983 Washington quarter struck on copper planchet. Mint error. Rare.in. The years that followed, Thomas watched as whispers of similar errors began to surface in auction houses and collector circles. Prices fluctuated wildly at first. One fetched a few $100s here, another $1,000 there. Then, as more collectors became aware of the error's existence, the value climbed higher, inch by inch. By the late 1990s, specimens were fetching several $1,000s at auction, sparking bidding wars that left jaws slack. The value seemed to breathe, rising and falling like a living thing, but always trending upward. And yet, there were moments of doubt, too, lulls when the market cooled, when skeptical dealers dismissed it as a novelty. Thomas would see one sell at a low price and feel a pang of worry, only to watch another ignite a firestorm at the next auction. It became clear over time that the true worth of the coin lay not just in its rarity, but in its story, how a mistake at the Philadelphia Mint in the rush of economic revival had created something entirely unintended. The error itself was deceptively simple. A copper planchet meant for a different denomination, likely a leftover penny blank, had somehow found its way into the quarter press. Instead of the usual copper-nickel clad composition, this quarter bore the reddish tone and muted luster of copper, though flattened and dulled by the heavy quarter dies. The result was a hybrid, a ghost of two denominations sharing one form. Its edges, too, told part of the story. Where standard quarters showed a clear sandwich of copper core between two layers of nickel, this one was solid, lacking the telltale striping. Collectors and numismatists marveled at the improbability. How could such an error escape detection? How could a copper blank even end up in the wrong press? Theories abounded. Some blamed a rushed changeover at the mint. Others speculated about bins of leftover materials being accidentally mixed. The answers were never definitively found, adding to the mystique. For Thomas, each new detail brought renewed fascination. One afternoon, years later, he received an unexpected call from another collector who had been researching the same error. The man's voice was electric with a strange sort of urgency. He claimed to have found a second 1983 quarter with the same copper planchet error, but with an even more striking twist. The coin he described had a double die on the obverse, a rare doubling of the date and the word liberty, making it an error upon an error.at. First, Thomas doubted him. Such a thing seemed implausible. But when the man sent photographs, Thomas felt his breath catch. The doubling was clear. Somehow, the quarter's already rare planchet mistake had been compounded by a double die strike, creating a one-of-a-kind specimen. News of this discovery rippled through the collector community, igniting debates, articles, and heated speculation. The value of the original copper planchet quarters surged in the wake of this revelation. Collectors scrambled to find examples, hoping to uncover more double die specimens. Auctions began to list them with lofty estimates, and bidding often exceeded expectations. What had once been a curiosity in Thomas's collection was now a linchpin in a saga of human error, chance, and rarity that captivated the numismatic world. Yet, despite all the attention, no definitive number of surviving specimens was ever agreed upon. Some experts believed only a handful existed, while others guessed there could be dozens still hiding in rolls, drawers, or jars, waiting for an observant eye to notice the difference. And so, the story of the 1983 quarter error became a kind of legend, its value and significance growing not just because of what it was, but because of what it represented. A fleeting, accidental departure from perfection, born out of haste and human oversight, that turned an ordinary coin into something extraordinary. Even now, collectors like Thomas keep searching through stacks of change, their hearts beating faster when they spot that familiar date, their fingers brushing the surface of each coin in search of that muted shine, that solid copper edge, that quiet whisper of history hiding in plain sight. The presses at the U.S. Mint had long since settled into the familiar rhythm of production by the time 1997 came around. For decades now, the Washington quarter had remained virtually unchanged, its proud bust gracing the obverse, the dignified eagle clutching arrows and olive branches on the reverse. Even as designs for other denominations began to modernize or experiment, the quarter was steady and predictable, churning out hundreds of millions each year to meet the nation's insatiable need for small change, the Philadelphia Mint in particular. 1997 was another ordinary year, the clatter of dies striking planchets echoing through vast halls, workers guiding pallets of coins from one stage of production to the next. The copper, nickel-clad blanks, now standard since the silver days had ended decades earlier, were prepared in enormous quantities and fed into machines with the kind of mechanical efficiency that made mistakes seem almost impossible. But even in an age of automation, perfection was an illusion. And every once in a while, in ways no one quite notices at the time, something slipped through. In the spring of that year, as boxes of newly minted quarters left Philadelphia for distribution to banks, one bag held within it a mistake waiting to be discovered. A small handful of planchets, intended not for quarters at all but for foreign coinage, somehow made it into the press. Their metallic makeup was distinctly different, their diameter and thickness close enough to pass through the machinery, their weight just slightly off. And yet the dies struck them all the same, imprinting George Washington's image and the heraldic eagle over a surface they were never meant to adorn. Those coins moved out into circulation indistinguishable to almost everyone who touched them. They jingled in pockets, tumbled through vending machines, and passed across countless counters without comment. But sharp eyes and patient hands can catch what others miss, and that is how one of these unusual quarters finally came to light. A collector by the name of David Corcoran was the kind of man who never stopped looking. To him, coins weren't just money but silent witnesses to history, little monuments of metal carrying stories too often ignored. On a quiet night at home, with a bag of bank-wrapped quarters on his table and a good lamp overhead, he began what he'd done countless times before, searching through roll after roll, hoping for something just a little out of the ordinary. The first few rolls yielded nothing but the standard fare. Clad upon clad, dates and mint marks passing beneath his fingers without pause. But then, halfway through another roll, one coin caught his attention. It wasn't the date. 1997 quarters were as common as dirt. It wasn't even the design, identical to every other he'd seen. But the color was faintly off, the surface a touch duller yet smoother somehow, and when he flipped it to inspect the edge, his heart stopped. There was no copper band. Instead of the familiar sandwich of copper and nickel, the edge of this quarter was uniform, a pale metallic ring without any stripe at all. He dropped it onto the table beside another clad quarter and listened closely. The sound was wrong, clearer, higher pitched. He weighed it against another, and it was just different enough to confirm his suspicion. He sat back, staring at the coin, feeling a thrill of discovery wash over him. For all the years he'd spent hunting, he had never imagined uncovering something quite like this. At first, he thought it might be a leftover silver planchet from decades past. But the weight and hue didn't quite fit. After more research, David learned of an obscure category of mint errors, wrong planchet strikes. Planchets intended for other denominations or even for foreign contracts occasionally got mixed into the wrong bins. In this case, the quarter had been struck on a planchet meant for a foreign coin similar in size but made of a different alloy. The verification process was grueling. David sent the coin to a grading service for authentication. Weeks passed before he finally received it back, sealed in a slab, labeled in crisp type. 1997 Washington quarter, struck on wrong planchet, mint error. He held it up to the light and grinned, marveling at how a tiny accident had produced something so unique that as the years went by, David followed other sales of similar errors. At first, they flew under the radar, fetching modest prices among a niche group of collectors who specialized in mistakes. But the tide slowly turned. Articles began to appear in hobbyist magazines about unusual clad-era quarters, about how rare it was to find errors from such a modern year. One or two examples crossed the auction block and raised eyebrows when their bids shot higher than anyone expected. For David, each auction felt like a chapter in the story of his coin. Prices rose, fell slightly, then rose again. Collectors who had dismissed such finds as oddities began to chase them more seriously. Dealers who once waved them off began listing them prominently, touting their rarity and intrigue. What kept the demand strong was the subtlety of the error itself. To the untrained eye, the coin looked like any other quarter. But its telltale edge, its strange tone, its slight weight difference, all betrayed its true nature. In some ways, that made it even more desirable. A secret hidden in plain sight, a mistake that anyone could have held without knowing. Then came the twist no one expected. A second 1997 quarter error surfaced, but this one was even stranger. It was struck on a foreign planchet and dramatically misaligned, leaving part of the design off-center and revealing the raw blank at the edge. When it went to auction, the bidding frenzy stunned everyone, smashing previous records and setting a new benchmark for what these coins could command. That sale sent ripples through the collecting world, propelling all known 1997 wrong planchet quarters into the spotlight. Suddenly, dealers were scouring their stock, collectors were opening old rolls, and prices climbed faster than ever before. The market had spoken. This error, once overlooked, was now a coveted prize. David's own example, long tucked away in his safe, now carried a value he could scarcely believe. At the latest major auction, another example of the 1997 wrong planchet quarter sold for a staggering sum, sending whispers and applause through the room. The hammer fell, and the final price settled between $38,000 and $108,000, depending on grade and eye appeal. For David, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the journey, about the night he sat under that lamp and found a story hidden in a single coin, about how one small accident at the mint became a testament to the beauty of imperfection. And still today, he runs his fingers along the sealed edge of his quarter, smiling at the thought that somewhere out there, more might still be waiting to be found. The machines at the Denver Mint in 1978 ran like a symphony of steel and precision, each press striking thousands of Washington quarters per hour. The familiar copper, nickel-clad design, in use for over a decade by then, was a testament to post-silver pragmatism, durable, economical, and uniform. Millions upon millions poured from the presses that year, destined for pockets, registers, and bankrolls across the country. To most people, a 1978 Washington quarter meant nothing more than 25 cents. There was nothing unusual about the date, nothing remarkable in the design. Even among collectors, the year was rarely spoken of with excitement. It was, by all accounts, just another year in the long life of the ubiquitous quarter. Yet within that year's staggering output of coins, one series of mistakes slipped into circulation so quietly that it went unnoticed for decades. On one particularly long production run, a batch of planchets somehow entered the presses that did not belong. They were close enough in size and shape to pass through unnoticed by the mechanical feeders, yet different enough in composition and weight to make them entirely wrong for a U.S. quarter. Perhaps they were blanks intended for foreign contract coins. Perhaps they came from a previous run and ended up in the wrong bin. Whatever the cause, the presses struck them all the same, imprinting George Washington's dignified profile and the heraldic eagle into metal they were never meant to touch. And so these mistakes went out into the world like spies in plain sight. They clinked along with the rest of their kind, passed through hands, spent and saved and spent again. Their secret unseen. It wasn't until years later that one of them finally drew a second glance. A collector named Marissa Green had always preferred the quiet ritual of searching through loose change to the spectacle of auctions. She liked the hunt, the idea that something remarkable could be hiding in the ordinary. One summer evening, She brought home several rolls of quarters from her bank and set up at her kitchen table. Under the warm glow of a desk lamp, she began working through them, roll by roll, scanning dates, mint marks, edges. For the first hour, nothing stood out. The rolls yielded the usual parade of clad quarters, worn and common. But then she picked up one that felt just slightly different in her hand. At first, she thought it was nothing. The date read 1978, the design was exactly what she expected. But the color seemed faintly duller, and the edge caught her eye. Where there should have been a copper core exposed between the clad layers, the edge was completely uniform, a pale and consistent metallic ring. She set it aside and kept searching but kept glancing back at it. The sound it made when dropped on the table was distinct, a sharper, more bell-like ring than the muted clink of a clad quarter. Weighing it confirmed her suspicion. It was lighter than it should have been. Marissa's pulse quickened as she compared it against a normal quarter. The dimensions were identical, but the weight, the tone, the edge, all wrong. She remembered stories she'd read of quarters struck on foreign planchets by mistake. Planchets meant for coins of similar size but entirely different metal. The next morning, she brought it to a trusted local dealer who inspected it under magnification and nodded knowingly. He suggested she have it certified, and so she sent it off to a professional grading service. The weeks waiting for its return seemed to stretch forever. When the package finally arrived, Marissa opened it carefully to reveal the slabbed coin with its new label. 1978 Washington quarter, struck on wrong planchet, mint error. That night, she couldn't stop looking at it. She thought about the story behind it, how a simple mistake had made its way through the mint's mechanical perfection and into her hands decades later. She thought about the thousands of coins she'd searched before and how this one, out of all of them, had managed to hide in plain sight. Over time, Marissa began to follow sales of similar errors. At first, they seemed like little more than curiosities, fetching modest sums among specialized collectors. But word spread slowly and demand grew. Articles appeared highlighting how rare such errors were from the clad era. Auction results crept higher and higher as more collectors joined the hunt for these elusive mistakes. Prices climbed gradually at first. Then, a surprise auction in New York pushed the market into new territory. A 1978 quarter error, struck on an obscure foreign planchet and in pristine condition, went up for sale with little fanfare. But when bidding began, it became clear that more than one collector had set their sights on it. The hammer finally fell at a price no one in the room had expected, well beyond earlier records. That sale sent a ripple through the market. Dealers began advertising similar errors with renewed enthusiasm. Collectors dug through their old boxes, hoping they'd overlooked something. The value of the 1978 wrong planchet quarter surged, gaining a reputation as one of the more intriguing errors of the clad era. The most captivating part was the subtlety of it all. There was no dramatic off-center strike, no missing elements of design. Just a quiet, precise error, hiding in its uniform edge, its weight, its sound. A perfect mistake, invisible to the casual observer yet unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. But the biggest twist came when researchers traced the type of planchet used in the error. It appeared to have been intended for a canceled foreign contract the mint had quietly abandoned mid-production. Somehow, those leftover blanks had been mixed back into circulation instead of being scrapped, making each surviving example a tiny relic of an obscure moment in mint history. For Marissa, that revelation made her prize even more special. A coin that carried not just a mistake, but a fragment of a forgotten story. Today, the 1978 Washington quarter struck on the wrong planchet stands as one of the most sought-after clad-era errors, with examples selling at auction for anywhere between $44,000 and $114,000 depending on their condition and provenance. Marissa keeps hers close, not just for its value but for the thrill of having uncovered it herself. A single quiet evening at her kitchen table, a moment of curiosity rewarded, and a reminder that even among the most ordinary things, something extraordinary can still be found.